line. And I would like to also thank you for coming out. I understand this is a secure building, I understand. We have a lot of security in the back. So this situation that we're dealing with and dealing with Confederate statues has burst upon the scene within the last year with tremendous urgency. And this tremendous urgency has been because this has been long overdue. So what we've done today is we have decided to hold a meeting here in Paul Quinn College and discuss how this affects the African American community. That being said, I'd also like to take time out to recognize the city council members that are assembled here today. That will be Councilman Tenelle Atkins. Please stand. Councilman Casey Thomas. Please stand. I'd like to also recognize two individuals, Betty and Dr. Michael Phillips and Edward Sebastian for that effort in promoting this event and also for promoting the movement in itself. We, and I say we, meaning the American people, the people in Dallas, was successful in taking down the statues and the monuments. But it didn't always start off like that. I recall December 31st, we called a press conference, and I believe 3 people were there, myself, and Dr. Phillips, and Mr. Sebastian, and also about 4 or 5 BPD policemen undercover that were there to make sure that nothing popped off. And I see that we are true to that movement today, this afternoon. So I would like to go ahead and introduce the people on the dais. And we could not start this off without having Dr. Michael Sorrell to be here. And I'd like to thank you for allowing us to be in your campus, on your campus. We had an opportunity to have this at Southern Methodist University, where I'm a PhD student. But we wanted to go ahead and bring this here because we want to bridge the gap that exists between North Dallas and South Dallas. And the best way to do that is to bring the bridge closer to our people in South Dallas. So I'd like to thank you for being here and for allowing us to be here as well. Mr. Mike Lowe, who I recently met, and he asked me earlier, he said, if I'd known I was supposed to dress up, I would have dressed up. But you see, the way he's dressed like he is for the people. You see what he has on? This is not an indication of disrespect, this is an indication of ultimate respect. So when we build it in our community, we're all dressed up when we are moving with inside and moving outside and moving the community forward. So we'd like to thank you for attending here. And he's also responsible for taking down the statues in San Antonio, Texas. And we're still working on that hotel in San Antonio called the Robert E. Lee Hotel. So we need to work on that. But I think we need to go ahead and work on that. SMU, Nell Woods. Good to see you. Lord Woods. And this is what I'm saying here. We could not have anything happen education-wise with me without having SMU. So Lord, I'd like to thank you for being here. One of these days they're going to give me the right telephone number to get in touch with you. So Sarah McCool, she is involved with the Mothers Against Police Brutality. This is one of the things that I believe that there's a football star that is now taking a knee and forcing all of America to take a knee as well. And this is one of the things that she was involved in and continues to be involved in. Coy Murchison, good friend of mine, good family friend of mine, was served on the Dallas Task Force that made the decision to remove some of the monuments. I understand that we have a few left, and I'm pretty sure that they'll be working on that as well. And last but not least, a good friend of mine, my mentor, and a brother in Alpha Phi Fraternity Incorporated. I gotta say, I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry. But that would be my good friend, Dr. Martin Delaney. So I appreciate you. going to give you the format of this. Now, on the Conferate radio show, we have a 2-hour show, and I promise you, I won't keep this. We won't be here 2 hours long. You know, I myself can't listen to myself talk for more than 2 hours, so I'm definitely not going to do it for you. And we have some students that are here, and I would like the president of Paul Quinn student body to come up with me as well. Is he here? Sure. What we're going to do, and we all know who the panelists are here, and what we're going to do, we're going to first open up the question, and we will have Sharon to go ahead and read the question. I have it right here, and then we'll go with the second set of questions that we have for everyone. We will be out by 8:30, if not a little bit before that. But I want you to know that what we're doing here is not for us. It's for the future. I recall being here several years ago when this was Bishop College and now it's Paul Quinn College. And it was people like you that are sitting in the audience that took me under your wings and pushed me forward. So I wanted to go ahead and return the favor. And without further ado, Sean.
In lieu of being present, permit me, sir, to pose this question to you. What prevents Paul Quinn College from calling on Southern Methodist University, founded in 1911 by the Methodist Episcopal Church South, to consider changing its name, one associated with slavery and white supremacy, and renaming itself United Methodist University? The foundation for Paul Quinn College was laid in 1872 by a small group of African American Methodist Episcopal preachers at Metropolitan AME Church in Austin. The AME Church has been founded in 1806 by blacks who felt unwelcome in the Methodist Episcopal Church. In 1844, the Methodist Episcopal Church split between North and South because of tensions over slavery and over the power of bishops in the denomination. The two separate general conferences, Methodist Episcopal Church North and Methodist Episcopal Church South, remained apart until 1939. The two denominations reunited to create the Methodist Church later in 1968. In Dallas, the United Methodist Church was formed when the Evangelical United Brethren Church joined with the reunited Methodist Church to create the United Methodist Church as it stands today. I'd be honored if you aired a response to my question at the Monday event. I've had contact with some who I believe may attend, and they may inform me if you address the question there. But if you have no opportunity to do so, I would much appreciate an email response from you. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, I appreciate it. I'll start with you, Dr. Sorrell. And I love the way this question was versed out. This is a long-winded question, wasn't it? But the long-winded question basically, simply put, should SMU change its name? And he gave a historical context to it. And this is what we're dealing with, again, in building bridges that connect North and South. You have a school that's in the South, which is a predominantly black school, and then you have a school in the North, which is a predominantly white school. How can we build and bridge that gap? Dr. Sorrell.
You know, I thought it was an interesting question when I read the email. Frankly, I thought it was a bit out of place to expect us to tell another institution what to do with its name, because we would not ever welcome someone telling us what to do with our name. Southern Methodist University, and so let's look back at the history of the institutions. Bishop College was recruited to relocate to Dallas in the early 1960s in an effort to maintain SMU's all-white enrollment. That is why the institution was brought here. Okay, the city leaders built this campus in an effort to appease individuals. So, to me, the name of SMU is not really that material. There's a different set of issues there. Right? One which I think you have to ask a different question. And that is why in this day and age do we have an enclave like the Park Cities? Right? I mean, I think that there are, if we're going to ask critical questions, perhaps we should start at the root of the critical questions. Look, I think people should live in the places they want to live in, but I think you have to acknowledge the fact that this is the history of that community. So I'm not going to spend any time telling SMU what to call itself, right? I am going to ask more critical questions about what is all of our responsibilities about, or to challenge the nature of the communities in which we reside. I think that is a better way of spending our time. But you know, you have to appreciate the history of why we have the campus where we are, and that's our view on it.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to take that question?
I think I'm loud enough for you to hear me, absent the mic. In this current climate where we are trying to assert, you know, what it means to us to have, what it means to us to have those labels, statutes, names that are inherently offensive. And what that means is it transcends into today's climate and how we are living and adjusting through that. So if you're looking to change the name Southern Methodist University to United Methodist University, I think I agree with, I should say our president, because I am a proud graduate of Paul Quinn College. So thank you, I'm glad to be home. So, but I think what you really want to know is how can you improve upon it where the school is inclusive, absent the name. So I think we need to look at what is it that SMU does to further our community. I think we fight the fights that need fighting, and then we fight the fights we can win. With the Confederate monuments and taking those statues down and addressing that issue, we're looking at it as offensive because of institutionalized racism and because it was erected in a time that was to further fear-mongering and intimidation. And I don't want to see us kind of mix the two. So while you're looking at how you can make it more inclusive, don't get stuck in the minutia of it, because ultimately what you want to do is hold SMU accountable, even in their name, for how they treat us.
Any further responses? Thank you. I'll go to the next question. That was the first question we received, the email question that everyone read earlier. The basic question is, where do we go from here? What we have observed within the last year, that a movement that 3 people took place on December 31st has mushroomed to a movement in which several statues have been removed. Among them, the Lee Monument at Oaklawn Park, the renamed Oaklawn Park. Where do we go from here? And I'll start from the far right side, which will be Dr. Glenn.
Well, believe it or not, I think we've made quite a bit of progress, some impressive progress, but obviously there's more to be done. Being an educator, retired educator, I actually think that we need to address curriculum and what's happening in our high schools, elementary schools, and middle schools, in the sense of, how can I put this? One of the things that those of us who have advocated taking down the statues are accused of is rewriting history, engaging in revisionism, trying to hide history and suppress history. When in reality, the fact that the monuments and statues were revered and present on our landscape for so long was actually a revision of history. So basically, I'm talking about revising the history, but not revising it to tell a lie, as the monuments and memorials and all the names for the Confederacy did for over 100 years, but telling the truth. Telling the truth in the curriculum in high school, social studies and history. And let me explain what I mean. I'm working with the Fort Worth Independent School District right now to overlay some African American history on their social studies curriculum, using the TEKS and the standards. And that's a tough job because the standards and the TEKS, in many cases, repeat the lies. That the Civil War, for example, was about states' rights. I asked a group of teachers a couple weeks ago, what caused the Civil War? States' rights, economics. Not one of them said slavery, which is the thing that indeed that we are challenging here in terms of these lies across the landscape. So I think the next step is that we need to begin to correct the curriculum. I'm trying not to be too long, but one of the things that accompanied the erecting of these statues was an attempt in the South to literally write slavery out of the curriculum in the high schools, on the college campuses, in the schools, so that if you were a teacher teaching that slavery was the cause of the Civil War, you could be fired in the South. And of course, again, I'm trying not to be too long. The United Daughters of Confederacy did a wonderful job. If you want to see how a curriculum, how in a section of the country has been propagandized and politicized, and I'll shut up there.
We'll just go down the road.
When you ask where do we go from here, I think you're absolutely right. It needs to be education, but one of the things that we are plagued with when we're talking about taking down the statues is there's no context for why we're taking them down. And so it seems that what we're trying to do is rewrite history in a sense that we don't want the story to be told. One of the things that I find most amusing is that the Confederate flag and those that carry it say that they are, that is part of their history. And so, and you will find them that say that my family was poor and they didn't own slaves. And so it's just a part of our history. And so Robert E. Lee statue that Sarah and I and others were avid about removing becomes this man that was just part of a historical context. But they do not tell the fact that he was a traitor. And by doing what he did, it was treason. And so if we don't tell the whole story, as you eloquently stated, in a way that helps people understand that we're not just removing this statue because we find it offensive as people of color or descendants of slaves or because slavery took place, we have to also tell the story that this statue was erected because it wanted to create intimidation and hold a group of people in their place. So I think it's extremely important to not just remove them and take them down, as we talk about where we go from here, but to educate around the statues in a way that is earnest and frank.
So where do we go from here? The way I think about it is this. We are often, or at least I wasn't in Dallas, taught that we are creators and that we can envision and create the now and the future that we want. We inherit buildings, we inherit monuments, we inherit ideas from our family, from our community, from the greater society, and that becomes the truth of our lives. Even ideas about ourselves, what's beautiful, what's not beautiful, what we should like, what we shouldn't like, and the tools for becoming one of those creators aren't always apparent. And so, for me, what I think about in terms of where we go in the future is more people feeling and believing that they're in the driver's seat of what the future should look like. And I think right now, even though it feels tumultuous, the last couple of years have felt tumultuous, it's because more people are standing up and speaking out and saying, this is what I want, this is what I believe, whether that be what's appropriate to wear to a panel or anywhere else. You know, even I was on the Confederate Monuments Task Force and I wore a Kaepernick jersey, I dressed up, I wore whatever I want because part of that was intentional because it doesn't change what I bring to the table. And so I say that to say there are a lot of frontiers about where we go in the future. In terms of the Confederate monuments, unfortunately, they will be preserved until someone decides to do something else with them. But I believe that that's not the most important piece. I think the most important piece is the city of Dallas taking up the conversations about what we want our public space to look like. What represents our values right now? What does this community, and this community meaning everybody, children, old folks, young folks, black, brown, indigenous, Latino, LGBTQ, everybody. What unites all of us? Who are the people we want to leave for future generations? So I think that's a question in terms of public art. In terms of public space, I think we need to name some of our parks. We have over 200 parks that have placeholder names, meaning they're just named something based on the street that they're on. So I think that we as a community should think about what we want to name our streets, what we want to name our schools, what kind of spaces we want, what kind of businesses we want. Those are all civic life questions that I think we should explore. And for me, where I'm going is ending police brutality, working to change our policing system, holding our district attorney accountable for transparent prosecution processes so that there's fairness and justice across the board. So I think we all have different avenues that we play in, and I think also I'm on the older side now, and so I think the future isn't necessarily written by me, and where we go I'm not necessarily the leader, more so following the fire of the young folks.
Sarah, I would like to disagree with you.
Well,
you said you was on the older side.
And if I'm on the older side, where does that put you?
You're not on the older side.
But I'm saying that I feel like I'll always be young, but I think that the 19-year-olds, the 15-year-olds, the 7-year-olds have visions and have courage to taste and feel freedom in a way that we didn't. You know, when I was growing, if you had told my 7-year-old self that we would have had a black president, that wasn't even something I could imagine. My son has only known up until now a black president. He knows nothing else. And so his idea and vision of what can be accomplished is much different than mine. And so I say, even when we look at the Black Lives Matter movement and other movements, the vision coming from young folks is more radical and quite frankly more exciting than stuff that my generation and the generations before have created. And so that's why I say I look to follow them.
Ms. Woods?
Okay. Okay, so hi, I'm Lauren Woods. So I'm a visiting lecturer at SMU in the Division of Art, but I don't necessarily rep SMU like that. If you know about the rankings of professors, until I get full professorship, I don't rank. So anyway, I'm actually an artist. I moved here, back here a couple of years ago, about 7 years ago, to propose a project to the Dallas County Commissioners that was addressing the white-only signs that they had found in the building back in 2003. So if anyone had heard about it, one day a covering fell off. It preserved this white-only trace. It was sort of a discussion that happened over a year, I believe, a pretty controversial discussion. It even ended up on like national news at some point. And the county decided to contextualize. They decided to leave it there because they couldn't take it away, basically. They couldn't erase it from the marble. And so they contextualized it with a didactic, explaining the history, explaining why they were choosing to leave it there as a historical marker. And so I came in a few years later and proposed to the county to recontextualize this relic and by addressing it with what I call an interventionist intermediate monument. So if anyone's been down to the county records building on the first floor, right now it's under construction, but on the first floor you can find a drinking fountain. It looks like a regular fountain. You push the button for water. Instead of water coming on, a projection of images of civil rights movement and resistance come up, so a montage. Then after that video goes off, the water comes on. In addition, so it's a sculpture, but in addition it's also an installation, because I outlined and made a place for that experience with red carpet, with lighting, things like that. So I created an installation in a sense that you could place your body in and have a bodily reaction, a bodily experience with what you were seeing, juxtaposed to this faint, slowly fading trace of a white-only sign. So that's the project I actually moved here for, or moved back here for. I grew up here. And then another project I've worked on in the public realm that's currently on hold is, if anybody's heard of the Negro Park controversy. So that was a project that a collaborator and I were working on that was funded by private foundations, and was going to put historical markers of the original 7 historical Negro parks of Dallas to tell that history. So we did a sort of people's history, going to different neighborhoods, going into people's like beloved, family albums and things like that, to find these really beautiful images and history. So we composed a text that would be in each park, but right now it's held up because there was an issue with the funders believing it was too much about race. So we are currently on hold, fighting on that. So where do we go from here? So I'm going to kind of like talk and read, because I have a lot of thoughts on this. The second project that I had actually proposed 12 years ago was to deal with the Confederate monuments, to actually get to a place where we are here now talking about it. And so I've been thinking about these things for like more than a decade. And so what I see, there's a problem of history, we have a problem of politics, but largely because what we are talking about is happening in the symbolic realm, and it's culture, it's a creative problem. And that's where I've been sort of stuck on this process, is because I feel like that's what we're largely missing in order to really create a solution that's radical and transformative, is the creative. And we tend to dismiss art, we tend to dismiss like what happens in that realm, but if we think about it, the culture industry is like one of the most powerful industries alongside these other sort of sectors, and it's just seeped into our subconscious, right? So for me, to do the work of historical justice, to be restorative about this, is not enough just to remove and rename. We have to replace, and we have to replace with experiences. So I won't even say objects, but experiences that make people feel and understand what this moment is about, what history we're addressing, what we're attempting to correct in the public realm. So I'll leave it there for now, because I can keep going.
So I will start by saying, or quoting John Henry Clark in this statement here. He says, "History is a clock that people use to tell the time of day. It is a compass they use to find themselves on a map of human geography. It tells them where they are and what they are." As we look back over time, what we are waking up to and going to sleep at night is the reality that white supremacy still exists in 2017, and it is alive and well. Right? So when we identify the times in which we live, it will be easy for us to either answer the call, the challenge, to be able to distinguish what our role is. Individually, we all have a responsibility to dismantle white supremacy. One of my favorite heroines, this black woman said it best. She said, "I freed thousands of slaves and would have freed thousands more if they knew they were slaves." The reality is, in 2017, just like you said, my daughter too, all she knew was a black president. And now, on the setting sun of a black president, we have the rising tide of a white supremacist who is on an all-out attack on the very democratic way of life in which our wayward founders set up this country. When they wrote, we believe, or we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain and unalienable rights. Among them, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So as a black man, as a black woman, as people of color here, realize that white supremacy has not gone anywhere. These monuments that we are taking down, they are played out in systems of oppression that still marginalize us, disenfranchise us, miseducate us. And there is where I now go back to John Henry Clark. As we look at what has happened here in Dallas, what has happened in San Antonio, what has happened all across the country, we as individuals can use our voice, whether it be for the arts, whether it be for education. Whatever we decide to do, we have to use our voice. And we have to back our voice with action. And until we have congruent actions and voice, we will continue to repeat the cycle of insanity by just going along to get along. Thank you.
And I think that was an excellent way of framing it, right? I mean, here's the thing. Those of us that believe in justice have a tendency to fight battles instead of winning wars. We think that because the battle was hard won, and that we get to the other side of it and we were victorious, that somehow that's over. And to your point, I mean, and to your point about historical and art and culture, and removing and replacing, when folks want to dismiss history that actually took place, right? When slavery is being described as a work program, right? When, and I don't know if you all remember the book that was written about George Washington's cook and how they were happy, and you know, and the picture on the cover I found incredibly insulting and ironic all at the same time, because they showed the slave, the cook, and they showed his daughter. Now the slave, the cook, was dark-skinned. His daughter was fair-skinned. There are a limited number of ways that can take place, right? But if you don't understand that, if you don't challenge that, then it continues to exist, it continues to move forward. And the issue, part of the issue here, is to continue to have these conversations makes people uncomfortable. And you become one of those people when people see you coming, it's like, oh, here we go again, right? Well, you have to keep fighting. You can't allow yourself to become tired. And you also have to understand the power of institutions. Institutional racism exists. But we have an opportunity through the institutions we control to fight back against that, right? One of those ways of fighting back against that are our historically black colleges. But so many times we want to treat the historically black colleges as if they are somehow substandard, right? And less than, because maybe our buildings are a little bit old, right? I mean, so what? Some of the best lessons I've ever learned were in buildings that were a little bit old. Right? This is how we choose to see ourselves and what we choose to do and what we choose to teach. At Paul Quinn College, we choose to teach about economic empowerment. We choose to teach about the ability to use your gifts for the improvement of the society and the people that you care about. We tend to frame our arguments in an economic argument because so many of our people, 90% of our students are on Pell Grants. So what else would we talk about? Because we have to address those things. But we are giving people a pass because we don't want to be unpopular. I mean, Martin Luther King was not popular, right? If you look at his popularity ratings at the time of his death, he was incredibly unpopular. Muhammad Ali became popular the more that the illness ravaged his body, right? He was unpopular. Colin Kaepernick, to borrow your Jersey reference, right? Incredibly unpopular. It's an absolute travesty that he doesn't have a job. But it's not so hard to believe when you realize there are no black owners in the NFL. Right? So again, as long as you are asking people to do for you, you will always be subject to what they do for you. We're trying to teach a different lesson. The people who fund your dream own your dream. You have the dream that they allow you to have. You know, we have read the stories about what happened with your project, right? It never should have happened. But because we didn't write the checks to control the story didn't get told in the most authentic fashion, right? Without you going out and telling the story. So if we want to talk about what comes next, I mean, I think all of us have a wonderful vision of what comes next, but I don't think the choice is either or. I think the choice must always be both and. And from our perspective, it's about economic empowerment. It's about having the resources to support the narratives that our storytellers tell, so that we know they are accurate, so that we know they are truthful. And they are finding allies in communities across racial lines, across socioeconomic lines, that help us tell our stories in the most authentic fashion. So it's about coalition building, it's about being unapologetic about the need to tell and preserve our stories. Until we get to that place, we will always feel like we have to apologize and ask people for permission, when all we simply are doing is empowering ourselves and our community.
Thank you. That was a great answer. That's the very reason why we're having this at Paul Quinn College and nowhere else. This is the reason why, because we wanted to make sure that our story got told. We wanted to make sure that the public know that black folk got a voice too. When they bring down the statues and they tell the story, we don't want 25, 30 years from now, they say that a bunch of guys just decided to go ahead and take the statue down and black people had no voice in this matter. We do have a voice in this matter. Earlier today, and I'll ask one more question, and then I'll let the audience ask questions, because they're here now. I'm sure they want to be heard as well. Earlier today, on Instagram, we, meaning myself and Dr. Sorrell, I tagged them on Instagram saying we were going to be here. And someone had made a point to say that, do you think this will be a balanced panel discussion? And my response was, yes, it is going to be balanced, because therefore, no one had asked us in the first place for us to contribute. So therefore, it is balanced. Lauren Woods. You touched my heart. You know, my mom told me, she said, the worst thing in the world to do is to call a woman by another woman's name. So therefore, I apologize for that. So that being in mind, I want to go ahead and ask you to answer this question, my last question. The murals at Fair Park. It's artwork. It's beautiful artwork. Putting it in context. Should we replace the murals at Fair Park? Should we add something to give it an equal story? Or should we just leave it alone?
Yes, we can go on record. Well, I want to, so I'll answer that, but I actually want to speak to what you just said, because the funding, right, is important, and that's also being discussed actively on that was part of the decisions on the task force. How is the city going to approach this? And I will say, so I take the politic that I believe that the people should fund things, right, and we are notorious for being creative with how we can come up with money. And so for me, the fountain, what's important to me about what happened with the fountain was that that was a project that no Texas foundation touched. They refused to touch it, actually. Right. And it was nationally funded, but also the people funded it, because some, at the end, the county came in with tax dollars. And because of that, I feel like it is owned by the people in a way that's different than any sort of private partnership that normally happens in the city. And so the difference then with the Negro Park project was being commissioned by a private entity. And from the get-go, I was like, we need to have public support. We need to have public funding, because that creates a level of investment. And so I do think it's important, as we think about what comes next with these monuments and things, I think it's important that the city realizes they have to invest in it. It can't be an issue for the private sector. People have to invest into what comes next. And so on the record, Fair Park, it depends what it depends what the goal is, right? The thing about art is, and objects of culture, is that embedded in them is a technology that has been built over years. That unless you have studied it immensely, you're not even aware of how the form affects the mind, how it affects the body. And so something like Robert E. Lee's statue, that is a equestrian monument that is meant to be a symbol of power. And its form, there's no way you can go to it and not feel like you are below it, exactly by the form. And so there's no way to take away that power of that object without an intervention, without, I say, an artist's intervention on that, which means moving it, turning it around, turning it upside down, doing something else with it, right? Placing the body in a different relationship to the object. And so the thing that is about the Fair Park murals, it's pretty difficult to do that with mosaic and things that are pretty embedded into the architecture. And the idea that to contextualize it, to talk about the history, well, we have to question, is this accurate history to begin with? Why do we need to contextualize a myth? But it's also an artwork, and people are attached to artworks. For me personally, I believe you can take it down. You can take it down, put it in another space. But because it is embedded in the architecture, this is where the problem comes in. And so I think these things are actually being discussed in Germany, looking at the architecture that came out of Nazi Germany, what to do with it. And I think that there's some creative solutions, but people are going to have to get rid of the idea that these things are sacred and can't be touched. And I think if you get rid of that idea, these are not sacred objects, you give it over for intervention, for recontextualization, and it's possible to keep them in the public realm, but to take and subvert its power and tell a different story. So that's sort of my personal opinion. Do you have an answer?
So I was on the mayor's task force, and we voted to contextualize it. And part of the reason that we made that decision versus the decision to take the other monuments down was because of the moment in which it was made, which was part of the centennial, which is why Fair Park was built. And actually, we decided to contextualize it, but also to bring back a piece that had been destroyed or dismantled, which was the Hall of Negro Life, which was a moment, I think unlike any other in the 1930s, where hundreds of black artists were engaged to create a hall that depicted life at that moment. And there were 4 murals that were a part of that exhibit that I think 2 no longer exist and 2 are in different cities. And so part of our thought process was to recreate that hall, and also to give, and for me personally, I look at the work in Fair Park a little bit different, because the reality is the Confederacy is part of U.S. history, it is part of Texas history, but the Lee Monument is what's the word I'm looking for? Is honoring and exalting white supremacy, and there's some of that in what you see at Fair Park as well. So I don't want it to be confused, but it also tells a fuller story that I think I have an issue with the idea of destroying that. But I think that the Lee statue should be melted. I said, I didn't vote that way, it wasn't an option, but we need to get rid of it. It's 18 tons of bronze that would be better used as pennies, in my opinion. So, And that's just
so destroy. So I think that destroying doesn't have to be an option. So you can remove. But I think that or no, I'm saying like in terms of Fair Park.
right.
Intervention. So it's a contextualization in terms of a didactic is a different type of intervention than a creative intervention. And I think that the difference is like one is a sort of straight telling. But to make people feel something, I think you need the creative to engage that. And it can be as simple as a projection onto that space that sort of intervenes with, like, it continues a different dialogue, right? So it makes a more symbiotic approach where things are linked versus, because the thing is most people don't stop to read. You know, so if you never stop to read, then you're constantly engaging with this object of power no matter what, and there's nothing to destabilize that, you know? So I think that there can be creative solutions even in Fair Park, but you have to get the people on board to say that this is not sacred, you know, this can be intervened on.
And I'll just finish with pass it over. I agree with you, and I think beyond the artwork in Fair Park, I think Fair Park that's a conversation we need to have about the fullness of the park. And I want to say one more thing because I'm going to lose the thought. But this idea around education that was brought up, and as everyone was talking, I was thinking about Haiti. And in Haiti, school children, just like you memorize your ABCs and your facts, memorize all of the punishments that slaves were subjected to. So stealing a biscuit, you were buried and your head was only above ground with molasses put on your head so birds would peck on it. So the brutality and the horrors of slavery are things that young children in Haiti memorize so that they never forget. And I think it's also not lost on me that Haiti is the reason we have a free world, right? They freed everyone, that they were the first country to beat every colonial power, and still to this day, despite all the devastation and continual taxes and tariffs that are put on their country, they still have that same spirit and fight. And so I think it is important to think about what is our goal and what we're learning and why.
I wanted to, when we talk about education and we're talking about art and how to contextualize it, you know, I don't know if Sarah felt this way, but I know some other members of the task force, when we started talking about Fair Park in particular, I felt a sense of discouragement as far as when they were talking about it was a landmark and what you had to do and how it was going to be such this huge hurdle. There was the influence there, that there was going to be this huge hurdle to be able to deal with the architect of it, and that, you know, it was not only a Texas landmark, it was a national landmark, and that was to discourage us. And I said earlier, sometimes you fight the fights you can win, and sometimes you fight the fights that need to be fought. With that being said, we're always talking about education, and they link it to the Holocaust, and we talk about what goes on in Germany. I spent 2 weeks in Italy, and there was the Colosseum is there, and there are monuments to Pompeii and Pisa, and they tell you when they were built and how they have lasted through time. They tell you you're walking on cobblestone that's over 2,000 years old. But they continue to tell the history. In Italy, they talk about Mussolini. And they talk about Mussolini, if you're an American, you think of it in a sense of horror, because what you understand about Mussolini and his connection to Hitler and during World War II, but you don't think about it in terms of they have continued to tell the story of history. And we get lost in talking about the education part of it, and we get lost, and you'll hear those opponents that raise divisiveness and discord, and they'll say, well, you should keep it because it's educational. And much like the Holocaust, the difference is they tell the horrors, much to Sarah's point, about the Holocaust in a way that has never been done as far as slavery. And so when we look at Fair Park, we're also looking at what can we reasonably be able to get through the city council. So I don't want to be the Debbie Downer, But I do think that as we fight the fights that need to be fought, we also are looking at the fights we can win. And so we came together as a group. We came together as a group to say this is what we believe we can get the city council to agree to. And so part of that is to give $1 million from the city, to your point, so that it is preserved in a sense, but it's preserved in a way that contextualizes it honestly. And then to bring back, you know, what we said was missing, because they have removed any part of Negro life. So that's what we said we can possibly get through the city council. And I want to be really honest, because there are college students here, to say that sometimes you compromise for the greater good because you want to be able to fight again. You want to be able to tell the story later. So I don't think that this is the end of this discussion. I don't believe this is the end of Fair Park. She knows that I championed her cause by saying they never allowed them to tell their story. They never allowed them, when they were talking about what has been termed the Negro Park, they didn't give them an opportunity to tell the story. So let's not fall prey to saying this is historical. When you are fighting these fights and you're saying that this is offensive because it's intimidation and it lingers, and we have over 400 years of slavery and institutionalized racism, and we're affected today. We got a football player that's one of the better quarterbacks that doesn't get an opportunity to play because all he did was take a knee. We need to be honest about what it is that we want to tell in a way that can be told. So I think everyone on this panel has said what needs to be said, but we also need to be able to champion these causes in a way that we can win. So to Sarah's point, her 7-year-old son, my 6- and 9-year-old son, they will be able to fight the fight later. I don't want us to get caught in a situation, don't take a lot of time, I'll be done in a minute, in a situation where we don't have an opportunity to tell the story or fight again because we were so busy fighting the battle we lost the war. And that's what we did with the Fair Park. We fought the fight. We thought we could get through city council and win, and we did it. We left the door open for this next generation to come in and fix those gaps that we had to leave vacant.
I don't know if I want the mic or not. Very good, very good. Very good. Let me just sort of, some context, real brief, because I tend to be long-winded being a historian. I worked in Charleston for about 14 years, and when I first went there, one of the things I discovered, again, when we talked about contextualization, of adding to making the landscape, the public landscape inclusive. You know, Charleston had a real difficult problem because, of course, Charleston was a major entry point in the slave trade, and so as a result, that was a story that was not being told. There's I'm exaggerating, 1 million plantations around Charleston, and of course, they're calling people servants on the plantations. They didn't even talk about them in the first place. And then when they did start talking about it, as I said, they would call them servants when they were, of course, enslaved people. So we had a major battle starting when I first went there in 1994, in the sense of trying to tell the full story about how, indeed, Africans were the majority of the population in the city of Charleston. In fact, they were the majority of the population in the whole colony, the state of South Carolina, for about 150 years or so. Yet that story wasn't being told. In Charleston, we got a Holocaust monument before we got a monument to African Americans. There wasn't a single monument in Charleston to African Americans, given their role in their history in that city. So indeed, we started trying to do some things. For example, doing a statue of the Denmark Vesey. Some of you may not know that name. It took 15 years to get that statue. So indeed, you have to fight your battles to make them happen sometimes. Of course, the objection to Denmark Vesey was that they had planned a slave rebellion in the city in 1822. Never took place, and Uncle Tom house servant told on him, so he and 30 others were lynched, and their bodies quartered and spread around the peninsula of Charleston, not so that story wouldn't be told. So when we started trying to tell that story with a monument, there was just like here, some of the same battles where people were saying he was a murderer and we don't want to do a monument. Why don't you people choose somebody who's more wholesome than a Denmark Vesey to do a monument and a memorial to? But as I said, we stuck with it. Then of course, and I'm going to shut up after this little anecdote, we also then tried to deal with the issue of slavery in Charleston, in South Carolina. We proposed a slavery museum. As you know, there's only one at this particular time in the country, the plantation, the Whitney Plantation in Louisiana. So we thought Charleston, of all places, should have a museum dealing with slavery. Well, and the mayor endorsed it, believe it or not. But when we started trying to put it together, again, another battle that we had to fight, because basically the argument was, no one's going to come to a museum about slavery. Nobody wants to hear that kind of stuff. Nobody wants that pain. Again, and of course they forgot about the Holocaust, and basically they were arguing that slavery was too close to us in Charleston, that people, both African Americans and whites, did not want that pain, did not want to be close to the pain of dealing with enslavement in the United States of America, and of course particularly in Charleston, because symbols and images of everything that the enslaved people built in that city were still there. So the museum now has changed from being a slavery museum to an international African American museum. But I was at a program there in June talking about this new museum, and of course after they did the presentation, it's slick. State of the art, all kinds of digital stuff. And of course, at the end, I had to ask the question, and I'm going to shut up. Where's the pay? Yeah, no pay.
Well, I will say this. I'll say one thing. So this, been in a couple of discussions on this issue, and from the sort of liberal side, the issue of sites of conscience. So Germany always comes up. Auschwitz. And so when we start to think about the sites of consciousness internationally, so death camps, Goree Island is one. I think that there's a mistake, and I'm not saying anyone up here has done it, but in the conversations I've heard in sort of public discourse, there's this, and I think I read somewhere that Dallas is thinking about the Museum of Intolerance and maybe these objects ending up there somehow. But I think there's a mistake to conflate the function of these non-functional sites of torture and trauma with propagandistic art. And the reason is because something like Auschwitz is a physical space that, for lack of a better, I mean, as crass as that may sound, the function has been taken away, and it actually is now functioning as an installation space, meaning the body moves through it in a way to put you in the place of feeling the pain of the victim, right? Versus these artworks in the public sphere that glorify the victimizer. And so this conversation is never actually, being held in public discourse, because there's this conflation about what these two very different sites and objects and things, like how they function. And I think that that's one thing that should be sort of inserted into the public discourse as we think about what's going to happen with these objects.
Okay. Good. Dr. Surrett? Good. All right. We're getting ready to take questions from the floor, and I wanted to go ahead and make appeal to the first question. I promised was going to go to the NAACP president, former president of the NAACP Dallas Unit, Mr. Arthur Fleming. And Mr. Fleming is responsible for making 6 flags become 5 flags over Texas. The Confederate flag was removed at his behest, and it's been a long, drawn battle for that. So, Mr. Fleming.
Just to give a context, back in 2015, after the Mother Emanuel killings, and after the press conference, what I did was I set up a meeting with the mayor, Mayor Mike Robbins. We met and talked about the Confederate symbols and so forth. And he agreed at that time for us to do a commission to look at, doing something with them. Well, he gave the task to Eric Wilson, which I guess the ball just got dropped. And so, so it never happened at that particular time. But we did have a good conversation. He did know, he did understand that point. Something was going to have to be done. What I want to say about, you hear somebody say, well, we have to compromise, I'm just going to say this. I don't think right now is the time to be compromising. I think we need to be pushing. We need to push as hard as we can right now. Because we're in one of those time periods where we can actually change some things. So I think we need to, compromise is not the time right now. Now what I'm going to do this year, what the NAACP is going to do, I'm going to submit 3 more resolutions. The first one would be to ask the state of Texas to change the definition of what a nation is. That's Six Flags. Six Flags have it up there because they said that the state of Texas said that the Confederacy was a nation. So we need to have them change that. Once we do that, then we need to ask them to remove all the Confederate monuments and statues from the state ground. Okay? Take them down. You guys talk about education, and it's very important. Look, when we talk about these statues, we have to talk about the education piece in conjunction with that. We need the books changed. Mr. Ed, Mr. Ed Sebastian, he made a great suggestion, which I'm going to put in the form of a resolution. He says, why don't we have TA or the state of Texas put the information online so teachers can supplement their studies. Okay, we're going to have to push for this. We can't compromise on that. We also need an economic Marshall Plan. We Marshall Plan everybody else around the world, but we can't Marshall Plan our community. John Congress, again, they reintroduced Bill 1040, which is a reparation bill. We need to be pushing for that. We need to be pushing. We're a global economy. We got this guy in the White House right now, which actually gives us an opportunity. Okay, you talk about Harry Tubman. Hey y'all, we just got off the Democratic plantation. Let's keep going. Let's just keep going, and then let's come back and do what we do. Okay, and the question is, first of all, thank you, Dr. Lane. Dr. Lane came to the first Freedom Fund, and some white guy got after him. Is he still after him?
No.
Remember, he introduced it to us. So what I want to ask the panel is, in the context of some of the things that I stated, where do you think we need to start compromising, or do you think we need to continue to push? Thank you.
Well, I think there's not one right answer, and I think even the way that we talk about how this moment came about, where we actually had a statue removed, there is a great example of how stories are told. So many people believe actions began with their thought, their idea, their actions, and really, I think it's all of it, pushing it forward. And there are a lot of people in this city, named and unnamed, who acted in ways to get us to this moment. And I think the more we think about that and how things happen and how things work is how we'll get things accomplished in the future. So, and I think some people have to make compromises and other people don't, and we need both types of people working. We're not, the idea that we'll all one day be on the same page in the same bus moving the same direction is for me, not something I believe in, right? I think like some days I'm on a bus with these folks, and some days they get off the bus like I'm not riding with her on that. And that's okay. On different issues and in different moments and at different times, we can work together and we just push forward until we get closer to justice and truth. And justice and truth is ever evolving as well. Those aren't, places that we can land on. I grew up, I remember at 6 and 7, I'd be like, oh, one day I'm going to be happy. Or one day my life's going to start. Or, I just thought that everything was a destination. I mean, and that's the way I was taught too, you got to get into AP class so you can get to college, and you got to get to college so you can get a job, and you got to get to a job so you can have money, and it just never ends. And then the minute that one of those things didn't happen, I felt shattered, like, oh my God, my whole life plan is over. And then I realized life doesn't work like that. And I think the same is true for getting to that next point. So how will we get to where we're trying to go? I think it's going to take a lot of us working in different places. I think we have to get people elected into office that represent our wants and needs and desires and hold them accountable. I think we have to vote. I think we have to start organizations. I think we have to support organizations. I think we have to make money so we can fund our own dreams. I think we have to end police brutality. I think we have to be happy with ourselves and love ourselves. I think we have to think it's enough to be who we are, how we are. So there are a lot of different things that we should be doing, and I think all of it is the right way to do it, and all of it is enough.
I think when we start talking about compromise, I want to make sure that it's framed in the proper context, because I think it's extremely important for us to be collaborative. So when I talked about the task force, because we are talking about Confederate monuments, I want to be very clear that we had one agenda. Clearly some people that were there had another agenda. And it was very clear if you have the opportunity to watch the archives. What we have to be very smart, very wise, and also pragmatic and prudent about is making sure that we have a workable plan. I don't see that as compromise. See, I don't see compromise being not getting what you want right now. I had a lovely conversation with somebody that said that he started this thing about the Confederate monuments in 1992. In 1992, I was pledging Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority incorporated and Theta Theta chapter on this campus in 1992. In 2017, I sat on a task force for the mayor saying, pull it down. So I don't think in 1992 somebody made a compromise. What they did was they punted the ball a little further down the field for somebody else to get it a little further down the field. And so yes, sometimes you're going to be able to continue to run that ball all 50 yards and touchdown. And other times you're going to have to get it so far. Maybe you get it to the 40-yard line. And then the next play somebody else takes it down to the 10. And maybe it takes 5 years before you get that touchdown. But you don't lose focus or lose sight of the end game. So the question posed was, do we compromise or do we keep pushing? Yes, we absolutely keep pushing. See, I come from the line of Maceo Smith, who was about pushing. And my mama was the first cousin to Albert Lipscomb, pushing. So I know about solid and pushing, but I also know that sometimes we have to take that little bit and hand it off to somebody else who can carry it a little bit further. Because to your point, yes, take Robert E. Lee down. I like what Sarah says when she says, well, it's 16 tons of bronze, and what are we going to do with that? Take it down. But the plan is to erect something that is representational of all people. Look at where that statue was. It's in Oak Lawn. That is a very diverse area. So let's put something there that's representational of the people that's there. Now, I don't know what the city council is going to do because we made recommendations. We told them what we thought was the best thing as citizens. This is what we want. Does that mean that if we don't get it right now, we're going to stop? No. That means in this moment, you did the best job you could do till you can do what you want to do later. So I don't see that as compromise. I personally see it as pushing.
Anybody else have a question? Not a question, but a comment regarding pushing.
I'm sorry.
Right.
Just real quickly, in lieu of what we've heard, compromise is not a destination. It's an avenue of approach to the destination. Everyone, I like to always say, everyone talking about justice won't fight for it, and everyone talking about freedom won't die for it. And you think of the individuals who call themselves, I fight for justice, or I stand for justice, and I fight for freedom. Well, what's the ultimate cost of freedom? Your life. That's it. And for others, though, they were giving their life for the cause. And I agree with my sister that we can't get tied up on the destination, because Moses didn't get to go into the promised land. You see what I'm saying? I keep going back to Harriet Tubman. She was called the Moses then. To see where we have come. My praying grandmother would say, we've come this far by faith, leaning on the everlasting arms, trusting in His hope. So whether it's faith, whether it's fight, whatever the case may be, to my brother, I believe that compromise is an avenue of approach. If you have it in you to say, you know what, I'm going to give up a little, or I'm going to share and let somebody else, then albeit. But then there's some people out there who's not going to compromise. And that may be their deathbed. You know, so there are certain times where we must remain unapologetic and fierce and fight. And then there's other times that we got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them.
Can I just ask a question?
Go ahead.
As we're talking about compromise and of course where we go from here, there's a monstrosity, and I call it that deliberately, right beside City Hall.
Right beside.
Yeah. Is there going to be any action on that particular one?
The task force recommended that it be taken down.
Okay.
So that was our official recommendation. And here's the thing. Beyond what the task force recommended, the city council already passed a resolution that said that these monuments, these street names, and park names are not part of the ethos of the city of Dallas and don't represent the values of the city and should be replaced. So the ball is in the city of Dallas's court, and I think that it's an important issue that we have to keep pushing for in terms of making sure the city council is held accountable for changing these things. And also, I think so many people say, so many people have criticized and said, well, it's too expensive and there are more important things and all of these other issues. And personally, if you know my story, I don't go to bed and wake up thinking about Confederate monuments. I do a lot of work. My main work is ending police brutality. But and not only that, and beyond that, raising my child, and beyond that, going to my job and doing my job, which is urban policy research. I do a lot of things, and I think all of us do a lot of things. And so this idea that our city that has $1 billion budget and a city council who was elected and their only job is to work as public servants can't handle dealing with Confederate monuments and filling potholes and figuring out how to have economic development, and although if they can't do that, then they're not the right ones for that job. And so we have to hold them accountable to do multiple things at the same time.
I was just going to say one thing about, is this on? Hello. One thing about the idea of compromise. I think that we have to be careful for how we perceive things, right? So what may look like a compromise may actually be the result of a very strategic process. that took a lot of back and forth, right? I'll use this example. So with the Negro Parks Project, Jim Schultz, without knowing much about the process, he wrote sort of his initial response to this whole thing, and he did it after everyone sort of weighed in on it. He read our text, he read the original text, he read the text the foundations had created, and basically he said, like, all of it's too watered down. And what he didn't know was, like, that was, like, where Cynthia Mulcahy, my collaborator, got in terms of putting the text forward and what was contained in it was our basic, like, most foundational line that we would not go under. So what he didn't know is that, like, for me, I knew that in the new millennium, we can't have a conversation about race without naming whiteness. Like, we just can't. We cannot say black without, like, there's no reason to do it anymore. And so I knew that I would not get a text with white supremacy in it. I knew that. But I knew if I threw it out first, that I would have my sort of bottom line. And having studied sociology, I was like, okay, white dominant culture. I think that's what we're ready for right now. If we can't say white supremacy in a public didactic, why can't we say white dominant culture? So I knew by throwing out white supremacy first, and they would be like, no. Then I'd be like, well, what about white dominant culture? And I'm like, okay, you know. And so to me, that wasn't necessarily a compromise. That was a strategic, like, knowing what I could get done in that particular moment, and also knowing, like, what the bottom line was in terms of where I wasn't going to go below anymore. So I think that we need to be careful when we think about, when we critique sort of other issues and movements and things that other people are leading, we need to be careful about how we perceive those things, because we don't know the background as to how somebody got to that process.
Thank you. Appreciate it. We are going to take some questions from the audience, but when I first started out, I wanted to make sure that we understand that there's a continuum between activists in the past and activists in the future. So I want to recognize some people that were activists in the past and are now passing the torch to the new activists. So we have Mr. Al Bull. He was attacked by the New Confederates at the Confederate Memorial, the Lee Park statue.
Formerly Lee Park.
Oak Lawn Park.
I just want to make sure y'all correct me.
Oak Lawn Park.
I want to go ahead and commend you for standing up for justice, and you really stood out. Black Lives Matter. You stand over 6'5", and you're a white guy, so you really stand out. So I appreciate that, and also a man who has stood up for justice in America, in Dallas, for many, many years, Brother Ernest McMillan, former head of the
Student nonviolent.
Student nonviolent. Yes, sir. I just want to go ahead and thank you for that. So I appreciate that. So first question is.
Hi there. I'm Betty Woods Reyes. I'm a student here at Baldwin College. I'm a sophomore and presidential scholar. And my question is, if the Confederate statues and monuments are not taken down, what do you think it will do to our society moving forward? Will it divide our country even more or unite it? If so, in what ways?
If they weren't taken down?
Yeah, they don't take it down.
They took some of it.
Well, more.
I think if we do not remove them in this climate, then what we are ultimately doing is allowing the memoriam and the honorarium of white supremacy to linger. I think that in taking them down, I've said, I don't want to sound like a broken record, I think we have to put it in context. I think when those persons who are looking at it as historic and looking at it as art see someone put a rope around the statue of Robert E. Lee and pull it down until it breaks, and they're celebrating, you put it in terms of barbarism, right or wrong, it doesn't matter what side you fall on, that is how it's viewed, that's how the media portrays it. I think it's important to remove them, but I think we have to remove them in context. In some cases, I think it's important to leave them, but I think it's been said before that we have to contextualize it in a way where the story is told. I think artwork is a very good, if I'm just not spilling all the secrets, one of the things we hope to do with what is now Oaklawn Park is to erect something that is representational of a time. That then in 1936, when you had the President of America coming and saying Robert E. Lee was a great Christian and an American, he was a traitor and committing treason. And then now in 2017, we are having the same conversation. So I think it's important that we tell a story. I do think it's important to take them down, and I'll tell you why. I sat in the chamber and I listened to people say why they should not be removed. And it was vitriolic. It was full of hate. It was inherently offensive. I think we need to take them down for nothing else than to spank certain people's legs. But I also think when we do remove them, we need to tell why. And some of them that you probably should leave, given certain times when they were erected, because it gives us an opportunity to speak to why they were erected. So yes, they should be taken down, and in those cases like Fair Park, leave them, but tell a story.
In telling the story, in the Dallas, in the Texas, in the Declaration of Causes for Texas, I don't know if you're ready, but I just want to share these two excerpts. We hold these truths that the governments of the various states and of the Confederacy itself were established exclusively by the white race for themselves and their posterity, that the African race had no agency in their establishment, that they were rightfully held and regarded as inferior and dependent race. And in that condition, only could their existence in this country be rendered beneficial or tolerable. That in this free government, all white men are and of right ought to be entitled to equal civil and political rights. That the servitude of the African race as existing in these states is mutually beneficial to both bond and free, and is abundantly authorized and justified by the experience of mankind and the revealed will of the Almighty Creator, as recognized by all Christian nations. While the destruction of the existing relations between the two races, as advocated by our sectional enemies, will bring inevitable calamities upon both and desolation upon the 15 slaveholding states. They gotta go. It's not an option. The problem is the energy that we have around taking down monuments, and I know I'm going to upset somebody, we gotta have that same energy in dismantling police departments.
Here, here.
We got to have that same energy in dismantling these systems of oppression that we caught up on symbols, but the systems and the psychology is where the fight continues. So though we got rid of the symbols, we still have yet to take down and fight the systems. And so when we understand what's our role in the systems, who gets a say, who doesn't, we see it played out in something as simple as sports. Where in this country, we have the highest office saying what's acceptable and what's not acceptable in something as simple as sports, but the issue is race. So the energy, the solution now, if we can have the same energy with Confederate monuments, symbols, then we need to harness the same energy around the systems. Now that's where you're really going to see some folks fall by the wayside.
Thank you, appreciate it. Last question. And then we gotta get the student in. He's been dying and chomping at the bit for it.
Okay.
But I'll go ahead and get you first, and then I promise you. You've been looking at me.
I was just going to add that I think that some of the chains and the effects of it aren't, we can't feel them right away, and we don't know that how they impact us. And I can say in my own life, for example, as a woman in the U.S., I went to Cuba once, and I remember everybody there was like, you can walk in the streets at night and you're safe. You don't have to worry. You don't have to worry about harm done against you. You'll be safe. But I couldn't I couldn't handle that. I didn't believe it. I am used to, as a woman in the United States, not walking alone at night, always watching my back, being fearful of what can happen. That's in me. That's embedded inside me. And these symbols, and that's why advertising is a billion-dollar industry. That's why McDonald's and everybody else spend so much money. That's why Instagram pays people to pose in certain ways with certain outfits, is because that stuff gets inside us and it teaches us lessons and it embeds in us. And so that's why we have all this tension. That's why there's so many police here, you know, because we're talking about and we're actually removing these symbols and taking away their power. And so that's why we have to continue it. We won't benefit from them continuing. I think it will continue that same psychological oppression that is embedded in Southern culture.
Thank you, appreciate it. I'm going to make a comment, then I'm going to give it to Austin, and then I believe Bill has a comment, and then Al, and then Brother President, my favorite captain.
And the former councilwoman has a question too.
And we're down at 8:30, so we're out at 8:30. So we'd like to go ahead and say again, and we can talk afterwards, but I want to go ahead and say that this reason why we had this panel here with Black women and women of color is because women of color have been excluded from the conversation regarding Confederate statues. So that's the reason why we have this. And I'm glad you said what you said, because it's very important. Black men as well need to be involved in the process as well. But most of all, with 50% of the population, the voting population of the United States, and there are women, but women not at the podium, so to speak, this becomes vastly important. So what we're going to go ahead and do, because our time was cut short, if we could go ahead and get the councilwoman to talk to the panelists after this, we're greatly appreciative of it. So we're going to have Austin ask the last question. I promise we will stick around for you, councilwoman, and then we'll close out with Mr. President.
Thank you guys for coming. My name is Austin Carey. I'm a senior here at Conferate College, majoring in liberal arts with a concentration in communications. And I'm from Los Angeles, California. And for you guys tonight, my question is, you know, in the current social climate and how society has definitely scrutinized Mr. Colin Kaepernick for speaking out and using his First Amendment right to speak out for what he believes is right. As leaders in your own realm and in your own platforms, has there been times when you felt like being bold and speaking out? Have you felt like you had to hold your tongue and speaking out due to fear that you were going to be ostracized or might have the potential to lose everything or be looked at or blacklisted or anything? And in those moments, what do you do and how do you encourage others to remain true to their beliefs and speaking out? Thank you.
I've lost a job when I came back to Dallas. I'm from here. I came back to Dallas to be a high school teacher. That was my goal. My thought was that I was going to be a high school history teacher. I went and got double master's degrees, came back. I wanted to teach in the district that I went to. And I got a job. It was my dream job. I was teaching 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade at Skyline High School. And it was the same year that there was a budget cut or a budget crisis in DISD, and they decided to start laying off teachers. But the superintendent was making $400,000 a year, and they had all this mid-level management that were making over hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, and yet teachers were the ones who were being fired. And so I was like, that's not right, you know, it's wrong. So I started speaking out against the superintendent. I think there's like the picture of the year in the Dallas Morning News was me trying to kick one of the school board member's car because so I was very active and very vocal in my dismay. And my principal told me, stand down, you know, you cannot be out there like that working as a teacher. And I said, I can't teach high school history, I can't teach civics and not stand up for what's right in this moment. And I was laid off. And at that moment in my life, I could make that. I made the decision to speak out and to stand for my values. Now, at my age, I have a 7-year-old who needs health care, and I make a different decision. If I were put in that same position, I would probably make a different decision because I'm in a different point in my life. And I say that because I think at different points in your life, you have to decide what you're willing to give up. I'm still very outspoken. Because of that, I'm not a rich woman. I don't get a lot of contracts. I'm invited to speak, but they don't pay me most of the time. You know, so that's a decision that I've made. But there's a free and what your path and purpose is in it. And the reason that we, like children and youth, have always agitated and led movements is because they're the freest in society, right? Like the Children's March during the Civil Rights Movement. Parents were like, well, we can't get out there in the streets like that because we'll get fired by the boss, etc. But kids were like, no, that's not right. They got out in the streets. They were arrested. They were singing on the way to jail. They were singing in jail. And so I think that's what the promise of being young is being able to, before all those strings get attached, and, you know, making those decisions to decide what your values are and standing for them.
And I would just say, to echo what Sarah said, you determine what your stakes are, you're strategic. Sometimes you don't even have time to think about that. And what I tell myself is that at the end of the day, like, you continue living. You know, you figure out, if something comes your way, whether it's, you know, you're blacklisted or whatever, you keep living and you figure it out. You figure out the next steps. And so for me, that's what I continue to tell myself when I get into those situations where I don't have time to be strategic. I have to go back to my values, and if I really believe in something, I speak against it, and then I deal with the consequences later. And, you know, as long as I'm breathing and healthy and everything else, then something else comes along. And I will say, like, becoming independent is also important. So with the Negro Park Project, before we became public with it, everyone was like, you will be blacklisted. The way that Dallas works, you will be blacklisted. But the thing is, people didn't understand, I was never tethered to, like, Dallas's system of funding, system of private partnerships, all of that things. I had a career outside of Dallas. And so for me, I had nothing to lose. And the 2-year process of depression that I was suffering going through this process, I was literally at rock bottom. There was nowhere else to go by disclosing what had happened. I couldn't get any further. So that's what I would say.
I'd like to answer as well. I'd like to answer. Working in corporate America and having certain positions, you also have to draw a line in the sand. That's going to be a very difficult choice to make because I like nice things. So then you start saying, well, if I don't have a job, I can't. You know, and I like to go with my friends and hang. So those are the things you think of. It's trivial. It really is. It's trivial. But you are who you are. You like what you like. So I work for a company called Epic Health Services, the largest pediatric home health care company in the state of Texas, second largest in the nation. They found me. I did not apply for the job. They called me, asked me to come in and build their compliance program. They didn't have a compliance program. So they needed me to come in. What I noticed from them, Austin, is that the people of color that worked for that company were treated very differently than the people that were not. And I had people coming in my office expecting me to fix their problems because I am the face of compliance, even though I report to the VP, who had not one clue about compliance and what she could and could not do. And so I started telling them what they could do, because I felt like my responsibility to myself, the line I drew in the sand, was to say, I am not going to allow this to happen on my watch. And so the CEO got wind of it and pulled me in his office and wanted to know what I was doing. Well, I talked around it because I was doing my job. And then I started telling them, keep notes, dates and times. I told them what the EEOC would be looking for, and it became very clandestine and very covert. And then it came time for me to tell the HR person, this is what's going on. And we are sitting on a powder keg because we have literally the white woman who only has on her direct managing team white women. And on the opposite side, where there's a Hispanic girl who reports to her, is managing a team of black and brown. They didn't get lunches on the black and brown side. They would go to lunch with the white woman's team. And I'm saying this, you can't allow this to go on. And I told the VP of HR, you know what they did? They fired the Hispanic girl who managed them. And so now they're looking at me to say that I got her fired because that is the game they play. And so then what I decided to do was to no longer be vocal. The next time CEO called me in there, I told him, point blank, flat-footed, looked him in his face and said, you are well aware that you only have one person of color in this office on the executive side, and that person is not an executive. They did not give me the title, but I did all the work, and I stayed there. And then I took all my papers and gave them to the ELC, knowing I was going to be fired. Sometimes you draw a line of sand.
And speaking of sand, I got the sand man right behind me. And just one brief comment, and then the last comment will be from the presidency. Thank you.
Asada Shakur said, it is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love and support one another. Why? Because we have nothing to lose but our chains. Once again, it is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love and support one another. We have nothing to lose but our chains. So in that moment, when it's time for you to speak up, you'll know because it'll be your duty. You'll recognize that because freedom will be on the line. And you will win. And when you do that, you free up others around you who may be silent, looking for you to speak up. And because you spoke up, you didn't cower. You spoke up and your voice shook. But you spoke up. We lost change.
So a couple things as we close out this evening. First of all, Austin and Betty both excellent questions. I continue to be incredibly proud of you both. Austin, you know that in terms of speaking up, it depends on the stage you want to speak from. Right? I've always encouraged you to speak from the biggest stages to have the most impact. Right? You can have impacts at all levels, but we need you. We need people to control institutions that can affect broad change. Right? We need you on the biggest stages possible to speak clearly, to speak authentically, and to speak unapologetically. That is what you are being prepared to do. That's my expectation. All right? All right. So let us give a tremendous hand to our panelists. I thought that I saw Judge Kim Cook. Did she get out of here? Is she still? Okay, just for the record, people, please let her know that we recognized her and we appreciated her being here. We also want to recognize that there's so many folks out there to recognize. I know I'm going to miss some people, but I did want to say hello to my good friend Bill Benson. Can we please give Bill a hand? I want to thank Michael Phillips for the initial email to hold this here. We appreciate the opportunity to engage and participate. Let's give him a hand. I want to thank you for being here, for the show, for the work that you continue to do in our community, to ask the questions that need to be asked, to be the voice that needs to be heard. We appreciate you, even though you're an alpha. All right, let's give him a hand. There's 3 T's in there, that's all. But we are thrilled to have this here at Ball Point College because these are the things that we stand for. Right? We think that you can never be afraid to have a debate. That you can never be afraid to ask critical questions. You can never be afraid to engage in the conversations of the day. Right? This is what our institution of higher education should be about. We do not cower from the conversation. We do not cower from the controversy. Right? We have a place for us to have a safe conversation on points that we will not always agree. We don't have to always. and we do have to have the conversation. So we are proud to be that type of venue. We are proud to have our students engaged. We're proud to have our faculty members. I see future Judge McIntosh back there. Right, we're going to speak that into existence. But my point is, you are always welcome here at Baldwin College. You are always welcome to find a home here to ask these questions, to have these conversations. We will not judge you for using your voice. You are expected to use your voice. Now, it has been a long evening. I apologize for having it to be cut short because I have to get home and put some babies to bed. People talk about their children. I've got a 7-year-old and a 2-year-old, and they want to see daddy before they go to sleep. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you. I want to thank everyone for coming out, and remember, you are always welcome here in the 29 Nation.
All right, we're free to go. I appreciate it. Thank you, Dominique Alexander. Appreciate you as well.
Thank you.